Hello, moms and dads. This is Mr. D, and we are back together for episode 8 entitled Communication is the Key. We have tons to cover today because communication is so important on so many levels. Our goal will be to learn a few tips and strategies for parents of kids aged 2 to 5, and we'll learn strategies to help you teach some vital things to your children regardless of their age. I'm also going to talk to you about the most important skill that I think our generation must teach this young generation. If we don't, it could disappear in a few decades. I'm talking about interpersonal communication, and we'll discuss it later. For now, I want to start with a few quick tips for parents with very young kids. Along with my experience working with elementary school age children, I also have extensive experience in preschool and child development. So I'd like to share a few quick ideas to help those of you with younger kids. First, from age 0 to 2, take every chance you can to talk to your children, to read to them, and sing to them. Just because they can't yet communicate verbally doesn't mean they aren't absorbing everything you're sharing. Tech use in this age range should be very, very limited. As your child becomes 2 to 3 years old, they should be learning about the world around them, playing outside, getting dirty, picking things up, and using their imaginations. Make sure that any use of technology is not a replacement for any of the actions that I just mentioned. Between 3 and 5 years old, of course, you need to continue reading, singing, and engaging with your child. But as you talk to them, use big words and advanced vocabulary. It's the best way to ensure your child will be articulate and expressive. With their tech use, you can introduce creative uses like digital art or storytelling, so they can learn at an early age that their tablets can be used for more than playing video games and watching movies. This brings me to another point, which you should also start very young, but it could be adapted if your kids are a little bit older. A buddy of mine, Matthew, in the UK, recently reached out and asked me for some advice with his 2-year-old son. He didn't want to give him outright freedom because he feared his son would end up being a little brat like he was as a child. He also didn't want to be so strict that his son would grow up to resent him. It was the perfect opportunity to share a strategy with him that I know has helped parents I've shared it with in the past. I'll use 2 specific examples which I often hear parents mistakenly use without even knowing the real message that it's sending to their kids. The difference between what many parents are doing and a more effective approach may seem small, but the end result will be enormously different. Many parents will say to their child, "What do you want to wear?" or "What do you want to eat?" It seems innocent enough, right? Well, it's not. What you're inadvertently telling your child is that they are the boss and that what they want is all that matters. Here's a subtle change, which will make a world of difference. Instead of total free choice, you present them with 2 choices. Would you like to wear this or that? Would you like to eat this or that? When you do this, you're sending them a much different and stronger message. You're showing them that you are the boss, who sets the guidelines and choices, but that you also value their input. It's also important to explain that there won't always be a choice, that sometimes you, as their guardians and protectors, will make the choice for them, and that it's to be respected. But that whenever possible, you'll give them choices and value their input. Now, your kids will get mad at you sometimes when you make the choice for them, but this is to be expected. If your kids never get mad at you or disagree with you, then they are probably the boss of your house and not you. It is possible to regain the power, though, so they know you're the boss. When they get mad, just remind them that it's okay for them to disagree with you, but you love them very much and that it's your job to do what's best for them, whether they agree or not. Remember when we talked about game plans? The same principle applies here. You're giving your children input and ownership, but ultimately, you make all final decisions because you're the boss. If your kids are younger, try using the 2-choice method. And if your kids are a bit older, then game plans can be used to get similar results. Let's talk about some of the most important things you need to communicate to your kids. As I share these traits with you, please remember that they must be taught explicitly and directly. I feel that parents and teachers sometimes rely too much on implicit learning. We think, well, of course they understand the lesson here, when oftentimes they don't. Just because they display empathy for a character in a book they read doesn't mean they understand what empathy is or why it's so important. This is why I say that we should teach things explicitly, directly, with explanations of what they are and why they're necessary. Although there are countless traits that you should be explicitly teaching to your children, I want us to focus on 4: manners, eye contact, consideration of others, and public behavior. If you can instill these in your children, you're equipping them with the skill set that will lead them to be effective communicators. Now, I've read articles in Fortune and Inc. magazines which talk about how much money big corporations are spending to train their new hires just how to communicate. And it's true of even Ivy League graduates. So let's start with manners. They're already not being taught enough to young kids, and it's likely because adults in general have become less polite. I know this because I still get compliments all the time for my manners, as do my nieces and the rest of my family. It's rare enough that people nowadays are often surprised by it. That's sad, and it has to change. It starts with all of you teaching your kids the simple art of saying please and thank you, teaching your sons to hold the door open for women or elderly people. Now, as parents, you must consistently model being polite if you want your children to follow suit. Eye contact is an easy one. Look people in the eye when you're talking to them or when they're talking to you. It's actually another form of politeness. Consideration of others and public behavior can definitely be taught together. Now, being considerate applies at home to your family members, but of course all family members, especially siblings, will intentionally annoy each other at times. So at home, it's more about reminding them how to treat each other. But in public, consideration of others and proper behavior are basically the same thing. Give your kids very specific guidelines to follow before going to public places, and have serious consequences ready to enforce when those guidelines are not followed. You don't need a long list, maybe just a few. Number 1, don't throw tantrums when you don't get your way. If you do, then we leave. Number 2, don't be too loud, whether it's your voice or music or something you're watching. The people around you have a right to a peaceful experience, and it's unfair for you to be the reason they don't. Number 3, remember what's okay to talk about publicly versus at home as a family. There are things you may talk about at home that you don't want to talk about publicly. Be very clear with your kids about the difference between what's okay and what isn't. If your children are well-mannered, use eye contact, and know how to be considerate of others, especially in public, they will have the foundational tools to become effective communicators. I feel strongly that interpersonal communication skills are the greatest thing we as adults have to offer this young generation. We all see how awkward many young people seem in social situations because they're used to communicating through a screen, not face-to-face. We may be the last generations who had to be able to talk to people effectively in person, and we must pass this on to young people. I fear that it will become lost in the next few generations or sooner if we don't make a concerted effort to pass on these skills, which many of us take for granted. So teach your kids about eye contact, handshaking, compromising with people, negotiating, finding common ground, and working on a team. Anything you can pass on in this respect will be immensely helpful to them, as most kids are quickly losing these skills by spending so much time communicating online. Moms and dads, you have so much to offer in this area. Please begin passing on these skills to your children if you're not already doing so. The employers looking for highly skilled workers for high-paying jobs all have the same 2 complaints about prospective new employees. They don't have the tech skills, and they don't have the communication skills to succeed. You can guide and support them to learn the tech skills on their own, and you can help them directly build their communication skills by teaching them what you already know. As we come to the end of episode 8, let's talk about what we covered today. I gave some tips for those of you who have young kids, as well as a few strategies for all parents to effectively establish their role as boss of the house. We discussed some very important traits that parents need to teach their kids explicitly and directly. Last, we talked about the necessity for all of us as adults to teach this young generation the interpersonal communication skills we all had to have. In episode 9, we'll talk about self-motivation and how to build it in your child. I really hope you're enjoying our journey together. Until I see you again, this is Mr. D signing off.